Hello and welcome back to the ARRchive Parley archive. This is a version of Parley, the Q&A thing I do in this channel, my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. This video is a bunch of mini responses in one big video, as opposed to the longer single responses I do for the paid Parley, most of the other videos on this channel, things that some of you folks specifically request. I make ARRchive Parley at the beginning of every live stream on Twitch. I use these instead of doing a commercial break on Twitch, which is what a lot of people do when they take a break in the middle of a stream. As far as I see it, you folks have, a good number of you who watch the stream already paid for the streams. If you support me on Patreon, which a lot of the people who watch the stream already do, well, you already paid me, but that doesn't remove ads on Twitch. I actually cannot remove all ads on Twitch. They don't let you do that. So the least I can do is minimize them. And I don't run ads on this channel either. You may still see ads, but I'm certainly not getting any money. And again, the way I see it is, as far as I'm concerned, you already paid for these videos, or some of you did. And it's fine for not everyone to do so. That's like the whole point of this business model. Anyway, that's where ARRchive Parley come from. I make one before each stream based on stuff that was submitted previous streams, and then I just do it as a way to keep you entertained while I hit the restroom or something, get some water during a stream. And every so often, I'll collect them into a big ARRchive Parley archive. Anyway, hope you'll enjoy listening. Here's 18 of them in a row. Hello, and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Exusi Enthusiast, who asks, here and elsewhere, players describe ChronoArc's chrono art as whatever, or mismatched. To my eye, it's no less mismatched than Arknights, where the splash art and maps clash with the chibi or minified enemies and especially characters. Sniper recruit voucher for your thoughts? Somebody likes Exusii and Arknights, yep. Okay, let's say art style cohesion is relative. Question mark, is it? What do I think about that? That's an interesting question. So the idea at a basic level is, yeah, ChronoArc, I would say a lot of weird things about ChronoArc to me revolve around the fact that most games with a lot, the elements of a game, art, music, basic gameplay, and then build systems. Usually the build system is the weakest part. Even of games I think very highly of, very reliably, the build system is the worst of those parts. It might not be bad, but it's not as good as all of the other parts of the game. ChronoArc is perhaps the first game I have ever played where the build system is, in my opinion, by far the best part of the game, and the rest of the game is significantly weaker by comparison. The story is not terrible, but mediocre. The build system is not mediocre. The art direction is not terrible, but mediocre, and the build system is not mediocre, in my opinion. That's weird. One of the reasons I think that the art style is, the art direction, I guess mostly, is mediocre, is that it doesn't feel well matched. It feels like this is something I'm not an expert in, but I'll just try to explain to you how I feel. The amount of shading or line work and level of realism used in different parts of the game's overall assets don't feel regular. It feels like some parts are pixel arty and some parts are more of a somewhat standard anime art style, and some parts feel more like a cell shaded or sort of more blobby Unity engine feeling art style. And these are all things that are fine. I'm not trying to make a comment on whether any of those three art styles is a thing I like. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to make a comment that they are not the same art style, and they are placed side by side quite aggressively, as if the game kind of doesn't have a single unified art style, as if there wasn't a document written that said that, or much more likely, this is the thing that the people making the game are comfortable making. That's what's in their wheelhouse. And that's all fine, but that is what my criticism is. Okay, so part two. In Arknights, do I think that same thing is true? I guess this is where I'm coming from. No. There are things that I feel like you could argue clash, or that maybe I don't like as much, but I think that the art styles are the same art style enough, close enough. But they are different, that's true. and it can be jarring and tone breaking, I could see that. Our characters in Arknights are all professional, uh, you know, paramilitary multinational relief organization slash Lockheed Martin gets a moral upgrade. Like what the hell? Like these people are the Secret Service, pharmacy philanthropist squad, but then you see them as a little blobby chibi. It's odd. I can agree with that. Personally, I think it makes sense for the game. That's part of it. And it isn't really a different art style, it's just a far extreme of that art style rather than a completely different art style. I guess that's how I feel. But those things are subjective. So if you're asking for my opinion as someone who has said the thing you're talking about, Exusi enthusiast, that's what I mean. I think that the problem in Arknights is related, but not quite the same, and I think that that is a less bad problem to have. One further example is that having the characters be like, minified for your tower defense is a good fit for the game. They're being placed in grid squares for tower defense, but the units you're placing are like a full body adult. So there's not an easy way to fit them in if they had normal proportions, or it just kind of doesn't suit the gameplay well. The chibis, whether or not you feel like that art style clashes or is merely an extreme end of the same art style as I suggested it was, whether you think that or not, there is some level of necessity. It is required in a certain way to do something about those operators in that context. Just to give you one other quick example, I've previously imagined I really like Arknights' design, and I've thought about games that I'd like to make that would be similar. And one way I've thought of doing a similar thing that doesn't do the chibi thing would be to make a train, and your operators are guarding sections of the train by sticking their head out the window and shooting some bandits that are attacking the train. And this would allow you to have them with their normal proportions, but most of their body is just in the train, and therefore you could have them look exactly the same way they did look in like their splash art or whatever on the battlefield without it breaking the gameplay by you needing to have a bunch of full humanoids when the gameplay is like you navigate a train or something. As an example, you could make gameplay somehow that didn't need to adapt like that, but in Arknights I would argue it kind of does. So there's at least some reason they were kind of required to make some decision about what the characters look like at a small size. In Chrono Arc, I feel like things are abstracted enough that they kind of didn't need to do that, I guess is what I'm saying. And as we've talked about it more, I don't think it's really that jarring. But anyway, that's what I think. I hope that makes sense as an argument. I would say my amount of agreement with the idea that Chrono Arc's art is so discordant is, it's not a huge deal. I think it's more just that when something is wrong visually, or like with audio, people notice really quick, it sticks out a lot for a little bit of something being off. Things don't have to be that wrong for it to feel significantly jarring. And so objectively, I feel like there's not much wrong, but you just notice that not much a lot, maybe. Folks, if you want to submit something to Twitch ARRchive Parley, this mini Q&A break segment we do in the middle of the stream, we'd love to have you. You put something in that link I'm posting in the comments. I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This time, nothing was submitted to ARRchive Parley, so I'm just going to hang out with you for a few minutes and tide us over while me in the future goes to the restroom, because we will have drank a lot of tea during this stream. Please stay hydrated. I know I don't harp on that as much as I used to, but I guess it's because one of the streams every week is literally just beverages the stream, so I feel like it's not as necessary. But for real, there's a lot of human problems that can be solved by getting consistent sleep, staying hydrated, and getting some movement in every day. That's not easy to do, and I know that because I have failed to do it for a very long time, but just please stay hydrated. It's something that I think a lot of people really underestimate too, just how much, I guess, water you can benefit from. Talk to your doctor. I guess I'm not your doctor, but I've heard people before, for example, say, you can get most of the water you need from your diet. Well, you won't not, but by most, it's like, well, you won't die, but you might wish you would. You will benefit from much more water than what you will get from your diet. I hope that would be uncontroversial. If you think otherwise, please talk to your doctor, and I'm open to a peer-reviewed study. But I recommend drinking more water than significantly more water than what you get from your food. Again, I'm not your doctor, but a decent starting point would be like 2 or 3 liters. These are half a liter, which I find very useful. So it's like 4 of these is like an okay amount. And I think you can benefit from more. But again, I'm not your doctor. I am not an expert on this. I'm not saying that just for disclosure. I don't want anyone to get water toxicity. It is possible to drink too much water. A friend of mine actually did have to go to the hospital a few years back from drinking too much water. But boy, oh boy, was he trying to win that Darwin Award. I mean, he drank, maybe, to give you an idea, like 7, so like 14 of these is how much he drank. And that was like, he was completely unharmed, but he felt bad, and we decided to take him to the hospital because there's one like 2 minutes away. We'll all sleep better at night. But you would have to drink, 3 or 4 times what I'm recommending here for it to do much harm. And at that point, I'm not sure why people feel like you need to not drink a lot of water, except for the classic complaint, as my partner often complains throughout the day, which is that you need to pee a lot. But that's what these breaks are for. See, it's all connected. That's how you gotta use the old, get the coconut water out of the coconuts, stay hydrated in this industry. Thanks for listening to ARRchive Parley, folks. If you want to submit something to these, I'm sure it would be more interesting than what I just told you. You could do that using a link I'm posting in chat. If you submit something there, I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Felix, who asks, what's the deal with Silverstein and fixed skills? Since our rifleman only pops off from skills played from hand, and cards created for him, a decent part of the player's options are cut off from the get-go. It feels like he lives on an expensive and lonely island, or cohabitates with Ironheart, distinct possibility. An expensive and lonely island is the name of my upcoming autobiography. So let's start there. Yeah, Silverstein has that quirk. It's true. His passive gives you extra damage when you do follow-up attacks on the same target, but only if the follow-up attacks are skills played from hand. Only if you play skills from hand after attacking the same target twice. Not when a card is created that it isn't from one of his abilities, so no Azar illusion swords. There are lots of characters that create many duplicates of abilities that go in your hand, but these were balanced to not work with Silverstein's passive because it would be very, very overpowered if they did. But he also doesn't work with fixed skills, which I think would be less overpowered if it did. Fixed skills, taking a skill out of your deck and locking it into your passive slot where you can always use it, or you can use it once every 2 turns, but for an increased cost. Yeah. Like, why would it be at all broken if he just could use fixed skills with his passive, if they did trigger his passive? So there's a point there where I think Chrono Arc does some nice things here. There are a lot of concessions in Chrono Arc where it would be more consistent if this worked like that, but it doesn't because it would be very unbalanced. Like, there wouldn't be a good reason to do anything else. So they made for some people's perspective, it might seem like the difficult decision to make them not work. Again, the big example for me would be something like Azar's illusion swords. Azar, a character that is a big part of the plot, and thus a lot of players will be playing early on in the story. You have to play with him for a good amount of the story. He makes a ton of skills that go into your hand. If they did work with Silverstein, he would be ridiculously powerful, no doubt. That would be absurdly strong. It would be strong enough that you basically couldn't do that mechanic because there wouldn't be any good reason to do anything else. Whenever anything was hard, it would obviously be best to stop thinking about strategies and just do this. And for a game like this, that's bad. Some people, maybe who aren't chewing on the game design perspective, might think, well, why? I mean, if there's just the best thing anyway, why not make it obvious? But the goal of good balance is to make it so there genuinely is no best thing, and failing that, to make it unclear that there is a single best thing, to make it not feel like there is a single best thing. And this would definitely fail to do that. However, it's also bad, but in a different way, to have something be inconsistent, don't you think? Living on an expensive and lonely island, again, autobiography coming to stores near you, your favorite bookstore. Look for it. I've lived a long and tiring life, and now that it's at its end, I want to tell you about it. And the name is An Expensive and Lonely Island, where skills not played from hand do not trigger my passive. It's less consistent, and that does mean that the player has a bit of a gotcha moment. When the player tries to lean into the mechanics do kick back a little bit, for a reason that for some players might not be immediately obvious, right? The player might try to use Silverstein, realize that he would be good if you could make more skills in hand, and think, oh, Azar would be really good at that, but then that won't work. And it kind of says that that doesn't work, but that just might not be that clear to every player. And so then they might feel like, and may not always think outside the box enough to realize, oh, it would be like unbelievably strong if it did work. But no one knows all builds. And the flip side of nobody knowing all builds is that people don't know how relatively over or not powered it would be. I think a lot of people, honestly, their humility causes them to not think their idea would be that broken, so why can't it just work, right? When in fact the designers have perhaps actually gotten there already, and it turns out it is quite game warping to allow that. It's a difficult situation. This topic has been coming up more and more as we ascend the heights of the powerful build system mountain. This idea that to get a build system to be as good as it can be, a surprising requirement is trust between the developer and the player, for a lot of systems anyway. I don't know about requirement, but like in this situation, it would help a lot if the player knew the developer had thought of that, basically, and could, take it as a given that there is some reason for it to be balanced that way. Or if an ability just seems bad, a lot of games, I think misguidedly, include abilities that are just bad sort of on purpose as like a learning thing or something. And players have come to think of this as not that bad. I've heard lots of people say like, oh, that's just the normal thing in game design. Well, that doesn't matter. I mean, is it good? Is it a good thing in game design? And a lot of people not criticizing that has led to an environment where sometimes people see something and they don't understand why it would be good, and they just assume, well, it's supposed to be bad, so there's no need to be interested in why it could be good. It's supposed to be bad. It's a beginner thing. That's not supposed to be good. That's just the beginner thing. When in fact, it's not more fun to think this way, and I don't think a lot of developers think this way anymore. At least a lot of modern development has left that idea behind. Great. But I have found that the players, maybe, here is where I'm coming down hard on you, not necessarily you listening to this. Was that, what's the deal with Silverstein and fixed skills, was your question. Coming to a bookstore near you, that's what I've got, I'm afraid. If you want to submit something to ARRchive Parley, wow, easy for me to say today. You can do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. If you submit something to that link, I'll answer it this time next week. Thanks for the question, Felix. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from True Mr. Foot, who asks, do you ever feel exhausted after doing Parley? Or is it always easy content, like exhausted in a way that prevents you from streaming or scripting? Is Parley tiring? Interesting question. Short answer is not overly, certainly not more than other things I do for a living. And then at the same time, yes, of course, it takes some mental energy. But I think a more nuanced and meaningful answer is to say, I think it gives me more than it takes, maybe. So let's break it down a little bit. Obviously, Parley being, and ARRchive Parley, like this, being a Q&A where I just show up and answer as best as I can, and not to toot my own horn too much, but me being a person who, like, that's a good fit for me. I have something to say about a lot of these things. Like, I've thought about lots of these things before. I've thought about this before plenty of times. It does mean that, of course, it's not the hardest thing in the world. It's like if somebody asked me what decks in Tiny Leaders in Magic the Gathering I like. I just know that. That's not, like, it doesn't really require effort to say, how do you make coffee in the morning? Well, I don't, but when I do make coffee, it's extremely easy for me to tell you in great detail what that is. Partly that's just, the questions people are asking are obviously in my wheelhouse. It's the audience I've attracted on the streams and the Zandypants channel, Bootleg Builds channel, that are getting to the Pantaloon Saloon channel or are watching these streams. So the questions being asked are things I know more. It's closer to something I'm going to have something ready to say about. Because the kind of person who's trickled down to that point is somebody who enjoys the things I'm making and therefore shares significant similar interests with me, whether it's the specific things or like that way of thinking about stuff. And then at the same time, I am also just a person who codifies things in my life. I write lots of notes down. I write an absolutely unacceptable amount of notes down. That's an understatement. And I keep kind of a running tab of these things. So yeah, of course, I picked to make this a big part of my career because it isn't that tiring. Part 2. Okay, but like it definitely is a little bit tiring. At the same time as I said all of that, I also do these because it's a really, really good mental exercise to get new perspectives and to own things by being able to explain them better and to see things from someone else's perspective or tackle a subject from a different starting point than I would have tackled it on my own. That comes up really often. And I learn new things about myself and the world and what all of you think by doing this. I do infinite mental jumping jacks to become the god of Q&A. That is part of why I do this, especially the full-length parlay. And yeah, that it is tiring some amount, definitely. It's also not to be underestimated, the physical effort that speaking for a long time straight imposes on the body. If I stream 3 times a week for like 2-ish hours each, 2 or 3 hours each, and then parlay, we're about every other day now, and it's going to go up from there, and they often take about 45 minutes. So it's building up. I mean, even if it was just that, I make no bootleg builds videos, I make no Zandypants videos, and my career collapses because I need to make those for things to keep going. I'm not making the videos I'm excited to make those too, but that I need to make. But just with that stuff, that's a lot of speaking. There's a lot of speaking. And I have an active social life as well. I talk with my friends. They didn't hear me talk all that time. So, yes, it definitely is tiring some amount. Okay, and then final meaningful conclusion. Yeah, I think the reason that it adds more than it takes away is kind of 2 things. The first one is it gives me so many ideas and such higher quality ideas, in my opinion. Again, not trying to brag, I'm just saying better than what I would have had on my own, okay? You don't have to think my ideas are good, but just think about how bad they'd be if I didn't have other people's perspective. And if you think they're good, well, I'm giving credit to this. So it's that, the things that the quality of the thing I come out is worth that mental expense, physical expense. And the second thing basically is warming up. I've described it this way a lot. Having it be that there's something where the whole point is I'm not meant to be prepared is very good for an overanalyzer like me. It's really good to get your brain out of this habit where you can't do this yet because it's not going to be as good as it could be, when nothing will ever be as good as it could be. Ever in your life in any way. If you think about that too hard, you will it makes you feel a little and that is a problem I have a lot. And so while I'm working through that on my own, I'm honestly not perfect at that. And so it is really nice to have a type of video that I'm supposed to make that I have an almost inexhaustible pool of to make. I can make parlay pretty much as I have the energy for it because the number of questions that comes in is adequate, such that I can just kind of get going. I just push myself out of the nest for the day a little bit, If I'm having trouble getting onto a recording I want to do for like a Zandypants video, I often just do a parlay first, and then that builds up to it a little bit. Or, I can be sure that parlay will be done in 40 minutes. So sometimes I just don't have that much time, but I have like a weird amount of time, and parlay can fit. So yeah, it's a very, very good part of my work overall. But does it get tiring in some way? Absolutely. Sure, you know. But I just think it's worth it. Thanks for the question. It was a good question. Unexpected, but good question. If you want to ask questions like this, you can do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. If you click that link and submit something, I'll answer it this time next week as the little break in the middle of the stream. It's Twitch ARRchive Parley, the medium to small version of Parley that we do here on Twitch. Looking forward to it. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Hank. This is a really good one. Hank asks, on the Parley channel, on the Pantaloon Saloon channel, why don't you try to make videos succeed more? Wouldn't it make you more money because you would attract more Parley patrons if those videos did better? Okay, right. So basically the idea being when we do these archive Parley too, why don't I put these up and then try to make them do well as their own kind of video? Sure. I'm gonna call this topic, that's hard to put to words, but I think this is a great question. I have a good sense of what you're asking. It's like the idea for me is there's an economy of effort, but that's not quite right. I think it'll come out from talking about it. There's two primary reasons. The first reason is that there's something that I just want people to see more in my life, that I want to direct my resources to. I think that if I can make them good, these Anipants channel videos are more worth the energy to get them to people. So anytime I would be spending doing that with Parley videos, that's time I'm taking away from getting, you know, other videos to get seen by people. And you can dump basically unlimited time into getting that to happen. You know, obviously there's a threshold after which, okay, you can't really make this thumbnail better for a video or whatever. But I would say it's a pretty large amount of time. So I would rather assign that elsewhere. But the second reason, and this is the bigger one to me, is that it would make the video less useful to the people that want it. So you pay for Parley. And Hank, I happen to know that when you requested Parley, I recall off the top of my head, you have taken my Parley ideas, my thought bubbles thing that I do, where I suggest a few topics for these Q&A videos. You don't submit your own. So that might be part of where this is coming from. But anyway, you know, people submit their topic to Parley, and let's say it's their own topic. They've got something they want me to talk about in a video for 45 minutes, and I'm gonna give them that thinking. As one of you has elegantly put it in the past, it's like you're kind of renting some bandwidth in my brain, and then I'm not a computer, so I get some benefit for having thought about that thing as well, and I get money. You know, people pay to support the entertainment I make that way. So I think it's a disservice to the person who requested the Parley to make it be anything other than for them, to do anything other than to start the video and say, hey, here's the topic, they get to say what they wanted to say, and then I respond, and to make the thumbnail or the title anything other than their title, or like a simple thumbnail that makes it clear this is a Parley video. It makes it worse for them. I want to talk about the thumbnail for a second longer, because I think that's the place where some people might be thinking, indeed, I've thought in the past, well, maybe that's something where you know, it could be different. Certainly, the thumbnails could be something else, but I think making it clear that they are Parley, that they have the Pantaloon Saloon channel doors, the logo saloon doors on the sides, making it clear that they are Parley, which makes it less likely that people will click on them randomly, makes them more useful to people that watch my other videos or other videos and have that in their, you know, subscription box on YouTube or whatever, because then it's easy to see, oh, that's a Parley video. Oh, hey, that's my title. That's mine. And yeah, I notify people on Discord too, but I think that makes it more useful. Now, it's not the end of the world. Would people be unable to find them if I tried to make them, you know, do better in the algorithm or whatever? Nah. But that's another thing, is making it such a direct way to address your specific prompt even if you take one of mine, but if you've written a prompt, making the video so directly united in the goal of addressing your specific prompt makes it less useful to other people. And I know that. I don't think these videos would magically be way more popular like if I put more resources into them. They're not unpopular because people would like them, but they just haven't found them. I think there are videos of mine and other people's where that's true. The video isn't unpopular because it's bad, or at least not primarily. It's just because people haven't found it. And if it just said it had 500,000 views on it, then people would just watch this a lot. That exists, but I don't think it's true of these videos, if that makes sense. So that's what I mean a little bit by economy of effort. There's a degree to which keeping it focused makes it, well, not broad, and keeping it focused is good for you, the person who requested it. And I don't know, I mean, I got other channels, like what's the big deal? It's kind of a bonus third thing, which is it's just not that good for videos to be popular. Like that's not, it wouldn't be good if they did succeed in some ways. In some ways it would, in some ways it wouldn't. But, you know, provided we get a certain level of success, provided I made enough money, it's good if less people watch the videos because it keeps things more focused. It keeps discussions that we have with people watching those videos more focused. So that's kind of that's kind of a different topic, but that's another thing too. What a great ARRchive Parley question, by the way. That's awesome. If you want to submit your own like that, you can do that using the link I'm posting in chat right now. Click that link and submit something, and I'll answer it during the break this time next week. Twitch ARRchive Parley rides on. For now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Frey Rock, who asks, why, all caps, do you complain about games so much? Uh-oh. Don't play those games, exclamation point. It's not that the game design is bad. It's just that you don't like those games. Okay, that's fine. It's good to get these now and again. I would like to say before we begin that I don't think I'm particularly violent or rude when I criticize games. I just say, I think this game design thing, and that is my opinion. I'm not harassing the developers. I think that's completely unacceptable, regardless of how you feel about a game, because it's, you know, a game. So I'm not sure I'm worthy of this level of ire, Frey Rock, but I have an answer, though, so let's talk about it. Why play games I don't like? Does that fit? Close enough. Yeah, I mean, I have an answer for you. I don't mean to brag, but the neat thing about me is that if I do something and you don't like it, I will give it up if it is proven to be a bad idea. I will tell you what my reasoning for doing it is, and admit if I haven't thought that through as much as I'd like to, or admit that upon further inspection, that's not a good thing to do. So I'll stop doing it. And in this case, I don't think it is. I have a pretty robust reason for why I do that. I would say my short answer is because you learn a lot about games by playing games you don't like. Now, I don't plan not to like them, right? There are people that do this. They kind of want to dislike things other people like. They want to say other people like bad things and I like the true good things. And no, you don't. Neither do I. I do think what's true about me is that I am not very sold on anything, to be blunt. And so the result is that I will often take the good and the bad, and other people will often be sold on the idea of a game, let's say. And so they just take the good, and they're kind of willing to put up with the bad parts. That's not bad. I'm not saying that's bad, but neither is it like useless or unproductive to say these things about the game are good, but also these things about the game are bad. To be blunt with you, I think that a lot of people that have the kind of reaction that I'm seeing here feel personally attacked when someone says the game they like has any bad qualities. And that just like, I'm sorry, it's not an attack on you. You need to just not care about that. It's okay for a thing you like to be critiqued. It's not perfect. And if what you want is to live in a world where we pretend it is perfect because that makes you feel better, I don't care. I'm sorry. That doesn't matter. That's not worth it. You should just grow up, is how I feel. It's probably one of the harshest things I've ever said in my entire time doing YouTube, but that's what I think. But it's okay to feel like, well, isn't that ruining my fun? But I want you to interrogate whether it is that, whether it's that other people disregard what you're enjoying and just say the bad stuff. But do I do that? If really, do I? I mean, if I do, that's bad, and I intend to stop doing that. I don't intend to do that. But I think most of the time you will find, if you listen specifically to what I'm saying about these games, I'm just speculating about how the design could be different, could be better. Maybe it would help if I were to say that I think a lot of games do what they're trying to do well. And usually the bad part of a game is something the game wasn't trying to do very well. I think that. Most of the time I play games that I would tell you I do not like. I like the part of the game that I think they were trying to make good. And my problem with the game is that there is some other part of the game that they weren't trying to make good, but which is tangled up in the thing that they are trying to make good. And I am neither here nor there about the game. I enjoy the good parts and I'm frustrated by the bad parts as I see them, so I get annoyed by that bad part. But other people are very sold on the idea of the game. They really want to play the fantasy the game puts in front of them. They want that thing, and so they will overlook the bad part, whether or not it is related to the good part, and say, well, this is just how it is. But it's not just how it is. It could be different. We could design a similar game differently and do that better in the future. The developers might agree and change their mind and do it better, as happened in Remnant 2, for example. The prism and fragment system went through a few different changes that make it very different than it once was. And while I still don't think it's that great of a system, it's sure a lot better than it was. That is because the players evaluated it, and although a lot of that feedback wasn't that good, enough of it was good that the developers thought about it and went, that doesn't really fulfill our design goals, so I guess we'll change it. Like, sure. And that's very noble of them. Like, is that not good? For them to be willing to change it that way? And that's all it is. I usually don't complain about these things thinking, oh, the developer's listening, listen to me, I know the answer. But that is a thing that happens, and we can learn things. If you do any game design in your life, and by game design I mean you run D&D for people, is some game design. It doesn't have to be you make a full-fledged game. Almost everybody does a little bit of game design. You can learn from these things. It's good to be critical of things you like. The reason I have such pronounced criticisms about all these games I like. Now, I fear, Freyrock, that you think I don't like a lot of the games I play on the stream because I criticize them. Right? Like, there are plenty of games we play on this streamer that I talk about that I don't like. But most of the games you see, I do like. I'm talking negatively about them because I like them, because I intimately understand them, which makes it clear to me where I feel they're falling short. And we might disagree about those things too. But yeah, my opinion is I think a lot of people just look past those things. That's okay. It's valuable not to look past them as well. That would be my answer. And I would encourage this kind of question more. If you have something like this, hit me up. Great. Please respond to what I said. Don't just ask the same thing again, of course. But that's not bad. I hope I wasn't too mean in responding to that. Folks, if you want to submit something to ARRchive Parley, even you, Freyrock, by all means, absolutely. That was a good question in a way. I would love to have you submit something using the link I'm posting in chat, and I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from True Mr. Fruit, who asks, I feel like we are very close to a singularity point in Warframe's power creep. Let's just title it that right now. Where Digital Extremes, the developer, will be forced to rework huge parts of the game for any new content to have any meaning. We have too much power on too many levels. I can no longer point to the single broken thing anymore because the entire machine is in flames. This writing is... this goes beyond melee influence, the torrid, roar, triple dipping, and slam attacks. We have 20 to 30 items, mechanics, or interactions that are so stupidly powerful they make controversial nerfs from the past look like an unmodded stug. A bad weapon, in other words. At this point, I don't see how a rework of these things could go down without massive community outrage. And frankly, Digital Extremes is too scared of committing to the changes the game needs. Is there an easy fix that solves Warframe's problems without reworking the entire game from the ground up? Just want to say that I still enjoy the game, and in some ways the game is healthier than ever. I just worry about the future. Yeah, I mean, you certainly sound worried about the future. Okay. So the question is, what do, basically? Yeah, I have a few responses. That's an interesting perspective. That's not how I feel. So I'll say what I think first, I guess. First of all, I think that because for work, dip into a lot of different games build systems, I have a different perspective on given build systems. I think the main difference with my attitude toward most games build systems is that I don't care that much about any one game's build system like health, I guess. This will come back around to my comments on how healthy it is because I there are others. I have others, and also because I don't think literally any of them are that good. Warframe's build system has never been meaningfully better than it is now, in my opinion, or meaningfully worse in the past like 7 or 8 years. I don't think. There have been big changes. I think that the 1, 2, 3, depending on how you count them, status and damage type reworks were a very big change that come close to changing the game's build system fundamentally. I think that the past 2 years with new development staff has been a big change to the game. Companion updates, Incarnon Genesis adapters. Have been big changes to the game's build systems, and there have been more challenging content like the Archimedia, for example. But I personally don't think that any of these things really fundamentally change Warframe's build system as a whole. It doesn't really change what it does well or poorly. I wouldn't evaluate it differently. In my A, B, C, D, F ranking system on my spreadsheet, I would have evaluated Warframe's build system as a B for this entire period of time, for the whole time I've played it, which I guess is like almost 10 years, but like closer to 8, I would say, that I've actually been like deep into it. And the reason is that I think that the fundamental thing that a build system wants to do well is to get the player excited to make different combinations of effects. The problem that you're describing is not at all irrelevant, in my opinion, but is only a part of what provokes people to make combinations of interesting effects. Recently, I was thinking about Monster Hunter Wilds' build system. It's a weird game for making builds because it's not very hard in an abstract sense. You get a very long time to beat each monster, though they do have a lot of health and they move a lot, and you can die a lot of times. Even if you go solo, I think I died for the first time ever. I've never meaningfully played another Monster Hunter game. I'm not trying to brag. I'm not good at Monster Hunter. You'll see in footage from me playing. I died for the first time maybe about 30 hours in, I would say. And it was because I was fighting a boss that had finally gotten to the point that it had enough attacks that would just kill me outright, and I hadn't been pressured to prepare for that yet. But at the same time, without being relatively prepared, you do die. It's interesting. It doesn't put pressure on you to do things fast. Nothing's going to happen that fast, really. But at the same time, the game is arguably fairly hard in an absolute sense, like compared to other games. And I think that this provokes a desire to make builds. Challenge, in other words, finally getting back around to what you're saying. Challenge in the game is an important factor. I just think it's only a relatively important factor, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Another way to look at the problem you're describing is that the weapons that fit the game's design all along have just only been coming out now in the past few years. And to some extent, I would say that's how I view the issue. It's more like if you could just kind of delete Warframe until a few years ago, and then kind of do it would take a lot of time, but not very complicated rebalancing to a lot of weapons. It would just be a lot of clerical work. And mostly focus the power level on what we have now. I think that is the game Warframe is trying to be. I just think that it is, because we have the memory of how it was before, it is noticeably different in a way that clashes with how the game was. But I don't think that the game is intended to be anything other than, like, my thesis, I guess, for the end of this answer is that the way the game is right now is the way they intend it to be. Like, to them, this is all working perfectly as intended. So if you think that it's that the player is way too powerful, and the game isn't that threatening in the grand scheme of things, I believe that is what they intend to do. And the only problem at the moment is that the game is not very united in that goal because it's very big. And so one way is just to keep going. If they just keep going. I personally think Incarnon Genesis adapters are a pretty okay response to the situation, if you agree that it is good for the game to get more of what has been coming recently, because it's a way to relatively quickly lift up a very large number of the game's weapons without actually changing any of them as they existed previously. I'm not entirely sure I understand why not change them as they existed previously, and why instead make Incarnon adapters, but it creates a progression mechanic, and it keeps people in the game longer, which they perceive as being positive. In some ways, I think that it is their attempt to make things better. But this was only meant to be a devil's advocate position. I hope that I didn't sound dismissive. I think it's interesting that you have this concern, Mr. Foot. It's all the more interesting to me because I have a lot of context for you specifically. You've done a lot of Parley. You've been active in chat for years. You know, I know a lot of things about what you think about games and games that you like. So it's pretty interesting to hear your rather in-depth perspective. This is like one of the longest ARRchive Parley ever. But I think that's what I have to say about it here and now. We'll certainly talk about it more after we come back. But my devil's advocate position is that this is perhaps going in the right direction already, and it's just a very big ship that turns very, very slowly. And so it will take a while for the game to be sort of populated with that stuff. I think it is a narrative, not a silly narrative, not an incorrect narrative. There is no correct narrative, but a narrative that is not the single reality of the situation, to consider it to be that the game is becoming like less balanced. That's only one way to look at it, in my opinion. I hope that is satisfying in some way. Maybe it isn't yet. We'll do our best to keep talking about it, folks. If you want to submit a question for these ARRchive Parley break segments, you can do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. Click that link and submit something, and I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from, okay, so in the state your name field, they've written, I want to buy a tortilla press. So let's just square that away. And then in the question part, it says, but I am scared of commitment. Okay, aren't we all? Making homemade tortillas at home will preserve agency over preservatives. That means making at least a few days worth of tortillas at a time with a short shelf life. Alton Brown hates unitaskers. Thoughts on a tortilla press? Alton Brown dogmatic advice spotted. Feels like a somewhat random inclusion, so I will comment on that briefly. Yes, there's this common piece of advice, and for people unfamiliar, that to avoid unitaskers, devices that do only one thing, you know, and they're this big appliance, but it only does one thing, is usually how the advice is framed. Takes up a lot of space, and so that's obviously bad. Now, I don't think this is a good way to give advice. I think this is a common way to give advice. It's a popular way to give advice, but it's not a good way to give advice because it ignores the reality of the pros and cons. I mean, it sounds authoritative to people that don't think about it that much, maybe, but that's not how it sounds to, I don't know, me, probably this person asking this question. It's stupid. It's reductive. There are some non-obvious reasons that unitaskers are bad. And I want to mention one of them, which is that they sometimes have a tendency to be aspirational purchases. You get a thing and, you know, you have to set aside this specific time because it only does one thing, but you haven't planned for that time, so it goes totally unused. Now, I take it from the way you've written this question that you will make time to make the tortillas. You seem to have thought about it a little bit, so I think that's probably fine. Let's talk about some of the positive things, since evidently the negative things have been aired enough. You know, I think the two main things with a unitaskery device are how much better is it at the thing that it unitasks? Is that the verb we're using here? At, you know, how much better is it than how you would make the thing normally? And how much do you do that thing? After all, what matters is not that it can only do one thing, the number of things it does. What matters is how often you do that thing, of course. A Swiss Army knife that has a bunch of settings in it that you don't use isn't better than a knife that is easy to use that you use all the time. And it's the same thing here. I have a couple of unitaskers I'll briefly share, since I think this part can be a bit more personal, to be a little fair for a second to the people suggesting the advice in a dogmatic and reductive way. It's hard to give specific advice like that. You can talk about what the benefits could be for the right person, though, and I will briefly give a few examples. So I own an electric can opener, a plug into the wall can opener. Almost everything I do in my life strains my wrists. So this prevents me from having to can open by hand, and I open a lot of canned food. I use canned foods like close to every day. They're cheap, they can be very delicious, they're often extremely good for you. Beans, need I say more? There are also some reasons not to use canned foods. Some people don't like the texture. Personally, having made beans manually, I'm kind of not entirely sold that it's worth the effort. But I can understand that, and I'm often having beans with a lot of other food. Like, I don't really like chili, just as an example. It's mostly going to be beans and rice, or beans like in a tortilla, for example. It's with a lot of other stuff where I don't think that the jump up in texture, and it's not just up in texture, it's different. Anyway, there are trade-offs, and having experienced them both ways, I just don't think that that's worth it for me. I think it makes sense to have this thing. Another thing about the electronic can opener, right, is that a normal can opener is still a unitasker. It doesn't do anything else except to open cans. So if it's cheap and you can't really avoid the unitasking, why not have it be this appliance? It was like $10, and I use it all the time, like multiple times a day, sometimes. I also have a citrus reamer. I think that's what they're technically called. So it's the thing where you take your grapefruit or whatever and you do this, and the wedge thing on top breaks the cell walls to get the juice out. And I have one of those where it literally just is motorized. You push it down and it goes, it gets out more juice than I tend to do by hand. Again, that wrist pain thing, and I juice a ton of citrus. It doesn't matter how many things it does. In my opinion, it matters much more how much you do those things. And I'm sure you know that better than we would. You seem to eat tortillas enough that you're considering doing this. So I feel like you've checked those boxes. And then what remains is something that unfortunately I don't really know, which is how much better a tortilla press is at making tortillas, or how much easier it makes it to make tortillas compared to, I don't know, how you would make a corn masa style tortilla, if that's what you're doing, like not a wheat flour tortilla, like a corn tortilla. If you roll it out, does it stick? Does it maybe crush the corn masa in a certain way that makes it taste better? These are complete guesses, I don't know, but conceivably it could make significantly better tortillas, not just make it easier, but the tortilla might be improved in some way by doing it. And I think that when people criticize unitaskers, they sometimes overlook that point where it might make it better. It might be a better version of the thing. There's this kind of phenomenon where people are hesitant to cook on their own and say that restaurants always do it better. In my opinion, because often they are hesitant to believe that there is a thing that the restaurant does that makes it better. They think it's just kind of a magic. There's no technical reason why it's better at the restaurant, when in fact, no, there is exactly and only a technical reason why it's better at the restaurant, and you can replicate that precise thing yourself at home. So that could be a thing worth doing too. How do places whose tortillas you like do it? They might even be willing to tell you if you ask them politely what equipment they use. Sometimes I've asked, like a coffee shop I've been to that I liked, sometimes I just asked them, is it okay if I ask you what grinder you use? Like, I liked the coffee and I just wanted to know. And sometimes they say no, and that's fine. And other times they say yes. And it's interesting. So yeah, I think maybe get it. I don't have that many opinions on specifically tortillas, but I hope this conversation was useful and encouraging in some way. I feel like you have it figured out. Folks, if you want to submit something for ARRchive Parley, this midstream Q&A break that we do instead of running ads or whatever, you can do that using a link in the description in chat. I always say in the description in chat, and if you submit something there, I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Asymptomatic, who asks for vague thoughts on demo poisoning. Demo poisoning, interesting. You said, I will primarily focus my Steam backlog on games with demos, knowing that I could get my fill of the gameplay without actually buying the game. AI Limit, a game you recently started playing, hello again, ended up being like a B or realistically C tier purchase. whose demo included everything I needed to know about the game in hindsight. That is to say, the demo poisoned my impression of the game as a whole. Interesting. This is a good topic. So there's a couple of different pieces to this. Demos as an approach to discovering, scouting out games, I guess, or if you have a game on your backlog already, playing the demo if available, rather than like playing through the game a little bit, presuming you don't own it, and also presuming you do own it. We'll get to that as well. And then there's also this element of, does it poison the experience sometimes? I can see that it sometimes might. This is a complicated issue, pretty interesting. So let's get into it. So I think that if you're in a situation where you don't have any interest in a game yet, but a demo is available, the interesting thing about demos is, to start from that perspective, that they have the ability to give you a slice of the game that isn't at the very beginning, right? Because if they let you play the beginning for free, on Steam, you can already do that because of their refund policy. But a lot of games with a particular type of game design in it, what type of game design could that be? Its build systems are extremely difficult to scout out in the first 2 hours of a game. The Steam refund policy is almost completely useless for build systems because it's almost not even possible for the system to be fully up and running or for you to fully know about it, even if the game does everything in its power to give you it quickly in 2 hours. This is not really doable. But there are a number of games where the demo kind of catapults you into the middle for a little bit and then you're out. Kind of an interesting approach, and this can be a good way to give the player kind of a slice of the game's, well, build system, for example. You could then see, oh, this isn't what I want, and then get out of there. Potentially. So personally, I think that is that is a good thing about that. Let's see if there are bad things that kind of counterweight it. So for one thing, I think if you own the game, let's imagine a situation where it's on your backlog, but you do own the game already. A demo is available, even one that takes place in the middle. I think I would strongly consider not playing it, because it's possible, I think this is where the like poisoning element might come in, for me anyway, where it's possible that you might not like that one snapshot of those things, but if there's no risk other than a bit of time to seeing how it starts out, I would kind of rather do that first and then see if I like where this is going. Maybe I just keep going and I don't know what's coming. I get the experience organically for whatever that's worth. A lot of game design work goes into presenting these ideas in a useful order. And if a lot of game design work doesn't go into presenting the ideas in a useful order, the game is just bad in most cases. And then if you aren't having a good time, if you aren't getting into it, then saving some time by like looking ahead using a demo that takes place in the middle could be a very useful way to save time, which is, of course, in some ways the more valuable resource than money. I'm also reminded of situations like, oh, The Witcher 3. Some of you brought to my attention that The Witcher 3 has some DLC, which allows you the option to kind of jump ahead basically to endgame and have a kind of endgame build and then go play the DLC. But you could use the ability to jump ahead like that for something other than to play the DLC. For example, you could use it to just not bother having to unlock some parts of the build system. Hello, that's why it was originally brought to my attention. Or simply, again, to sort of scout out. I dropped The Witcher 3 pretty early. For me, it's one of those games that a huge amount of people really like, and I just completely don't get it at all. There is almost nothing that appeals to me about The Witcher 3, but I want to get it, and so that's something I might do in the future. I'm happy that you all told me that. I might just, jump ahead and say, well, am I going to like where I end up? And then maybe I'm willing to just give it a little bit more of a ride. There are plenty of games where I personally do this. I mean, I cover games somewhat academically in many cases, so I'm absolutely willing to just kind of go with it for a bit. And sometimes when I do that, I have a really good time, even though for longer than would normally be reasonable, I had a really bad time. Monster Hunter Wilds is a recent example. I was very annoyed, mostly annoyed, for 20 plus hours, but I love this game now. And the reason is because I had a structured academic reason why I wanted to just get through it anyway. Now that I still think that's a major flaw with the game. Like that's still really bad. But if there had been a demo that kind of jumped you past that stuff, I think that would have helped in this case. So that's another way you can do this, is to imagine what games, if I could have looked ahead to where I was going, would that have kind of helped. There's also some games where that thought experiment would yield a more bizarre fruit. For example, if you were to jump ahead, in Warframe comes to mind. Warframe is kind of just different for the first like 20 plus hours of the build system. Then it becomes maybe toward the end game. And so I might like that better, but you have to play essentially a different game up until that point. I kind of feel that way about Hades as well, especially Hades 1, less Hades 2, which I think is good. The way that it is random early in the game and the way you can make it pretty non-random later in the game are not that similar experiences if you lean into them. But a lot of people literally don't even know that the latter exists, let alone like they like one or the other, you know. And I think that's a serious flaw. I'm not sure I can go that much further than this without knowing more specifics. I would be happy to talk about this more. What an interesting idea. I kind of want a whole parlay in this one, but we have 5-6 minutes. That's what I got. Folks, if you want to submit to ARRchive Parley and have something that I answer during these break segments during each stream, you can do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. Submit whatever you like, and I'll answer it this time next week. Give me something to talk about during the breaks. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Noonman, who asks, have you considered using a set of canonical build systems, I think you mean, as a way to discuss builds in general, like referencing Call of Duty to talk about first-person shooters? That's it. Okay, I think I know what you mean. Let's call it canonical build systems. So the idea is, have I thought about using a standard set of games that make, let's call them very good examples for now, of build systems as a way to make it easier to discuss this thing. Okay, so after all, it is very difficult to discuss build systems if you use a lot of different examples. They take a long time in each game they're in to kind of get into and understand. They require a lot of context. You often don't have the whole thing right when you start playing the game, or you don't understand the whole thing right when you start playing the game. And they're not it's kind of a sub-genre mechanic. You know, it's not quite like an FPS, and then they might have build system stuff or it might not, for example, or like a roguelike, and it might let you control the randomness to the point that it feels like a build system or not be designed that way. And so it's kind of less common to begin with. It's a complicated subject. It's time consuming to find examples, and it's more kind of further specific in games to begin with and less games to begin with. All of those traits make it more helpful if you had single examples everybody knew about. I guess this is the like Call of Duty when talking about FPS games. Reviewers, media criticism tends to assume people just know what that is, and that is probably mostly a fair criticism. Put a pin in it. We'll get back to it later. So why not do it for build systems? Yes, I've considered doing something like that, and I think that might be a good idea. This might be encouraging me, well, let's see, to do that a little more than I was planning to before. I was thinking of making a video series, something like how to get into X, Y, or Z game, how to get into Monster Hunter Wilds. These videos would be long, single release videos that are kind of a documentary of the process of getting into the game, plus a huge amount of quality of life tips, like weird little things in the menus or like quirks of the build system that I can clarify, but which would be kind of unpleasant to figure out on your own. Stuff like that. And also a review-ish of the game, and all packaged into this big long video. And I would probably make rather few of these overall. You know, I'm imagining that out of when I do my build systems of the year video, there are 3 games that I give my top 3 spots, or just I liked these 3 about the most, not in any order. I would imagine I would make a how to get into video for on average half of those games. probably, to give you an idea. So not very many. You know, there'd be like maybe 2 of these a year, or like 1 of these a year would not be uncommon. And I don't think that's a bad idea. You asking this question makes me think, yeah, maybe that is a good idea. I have some concerns though. The first one is that it's kind of a concern with anything with that's a canon, canon, like the literary canon. My beloved scapegoat for this subject. I think that this often goes too far. You know, looking at other media criticism in the world. People aren't making build system specifically focused game design criticism channels, but they make all sorts of other game design criticism channels, media criticism channels, movies, books, whatever. And I think that those channels broadly heavily overuse canonical examples. That is, they're heavily focused on the things that everybody knows and not other stuff. And this has a number of flaws. One of them is, if you're way into video games, and you like are into specific video games and you're quite deep down the rabbit hole, I guess, of video games, and you just happen not to have played Call of Duty, but for example, along the way to that point, should you go back and play some Call of Duty games? No, like why? Sure. You see what I mean? Not for any obvious reason, except that they're so overused as examples. So to be blunt, I mean, they're common, they're popular examples, but they're not actually good examples of a lot of the stuff they're being used as an example for, because they're not actually good at anything. Most of the things that are broadly popular because they are broad. They're not focused, they're not specific, they're not deep. Therefore, they're not good examples of most things. They might be an adequate example of a variety of things, sure. And I'm not trying to ignore that that is often what media criticism uses them for, but it's not great. The other main drawback I see to a canonical list of build systems is that build systems are a kind of underdeveloped aspect of game design currently. We would be setting as a canon that people use as a base of knowledge to understand discussions, games which are kind of not great at the thing that we're discussing. There kind of aren't games that are that good examples of, canonical build system design. So we would be kind of putting a lot of work into canonifying. I don't know. I like canonifying better. Canonicizing is, I don't know. Games that are not especially good at the thing that I'm trying to discuss with them. But overall, I think a little of this, like the right amount of this, is a good idea. Yes, I am slightly more convinced than I was before. What games would it be? Monster Hunter Wilds, Warframe, Arknights, Magic the Gathering, Hades 2. I would probably do Nova Drift and Snakers just because I think they're useful examples, but like, are those cosmically better examples? I'm not sure I care about that much. Chrono Arc, I think, Remnant 2. And I'm not going to try to pick games that I think are the popular examples. I'm going to pick games I think are good archetypical examples. And nobody, including me, can really have a good perspective on that, really. I would just do the best I could. I don't know. And pick games that I think are fun, basically. Good question. I will continue to heavily consider doing that. If you'd like to submit a question to ARRchive Parley, our midstream Q&A break, you can do that using a link I'm posting in chat. Submit something to that link and I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segments. This question is from Asymptomatic, who asks for thoughts on blind pairings. Okay, you're good at leading with the titles like that. Let's put that in. Blind pairings. I don't really get the blind part of this one, but we'll read through it. Genshin Impact and Limbus Company are the mutual examples of marketing build pieces in their build systems together, as pairs. The blind pairings, okay? An expensive 5-star rarity character and a weapon designed to be used by them, always bannered together. Oh, okay, yes. So, yeah, Genshin Impact having a limited time character available, and then a weapon that is designed to be very good for them, mathematically or whatever. An identity in Limbus Company, phoning in sinners of the same faction. Sure, okay, so Limbus Company doing something kind of similar. It has a different structure, where a unit will come out, and they'll be from some gang, or faction in Limbus Company's setting, and then another unit will come out from that setting that kind of powers up similar or related units. Yes, this does happen very often. The Parley author awards no creativity points for these blind or obvious choices. While any given build choice can be explained away, it is arguably inherently more interesting to pair game pieces that are not obvious. Magnets of the same polarity repel, and all that. Okay, interesting. So I agree that when these game pieces just directly point to each other, they are often uninteresting. I have a thesis for this little mini parlay, which is that it's not so much that it is bad for a game piece to be clearly good with another game piece. It's just that this phenomenon often occurs in cases where the game pieces are designed to be unuseful with basically everything else. And to illustrate that, I'm going to give you 3 examples of paired types of game pieces. The first one, less paired than the example you gave. This would be something like creature cards in Magic the Gathering that aren't really related in any particular way, but one of them is a creature type lord, as they're often called, that buffs all creatures of that type. So it rewards you for playing like more elves or more Schnorgle type creatures or something. This creature is also a Schnorgle type creature, just happens to be, but otherwise they have no real connecting tissue mechanically. There, you wouldn't necessarily want to play them together. It's just that if you are playing this Schnorgle Lord creature, you might be in the market for other Schnorgle creatures, and this is one of the options. I would suggest that this maybe isn't that frustrating to people who would be frustrated by this phenomenon generally, because it is something that puts the onus in the player's court to, that's mixing metaphors, to figure out how the piece will be useful. The game is about making a decision about what you want to put in your deck, in this Magic the Gathering example, but whatever, in your build. So a piece that says, hey, I'm obviously good with other Schnorgle creatures, but like all of them, and there are lots, still is a piece of the game that is about you making a choice, just a modified type of choice than before. This might not be something you personally prefer asymptomatic, but I would propose that this is not a creatively bankrupt thing for games to do. Type number 2, we'll come back to it, kind of what you said before. And then type number 3, above the amount of pairedness that what you're suggesting usually implies. Limbus Company has a pair of units like this. They're basically themed as like operatives or assassins. One of them is kind of the breacher and uses handguns, and the other backs them up with a sniper rifle railgun thing. And their kits are very directly tied together. It doesn't just say another unit from, whatever office they're from. I don't remember. Full Stop Office. Another unit from Full Stop Office gets this boost. They say specifically that exact other unit, when this unit does this attack, that unit will do that attack to kind of follow them up. And then their theme is that once sniper unit runs out of bullets, they'll retreat, and handgun unit has a way to reload. They're not just related game pieces, they are arguably the same game piece. And so I also propose that this is not as creatively uninteresting, because it creates the opportunity for the player to just work with them as if they are one game piece, just a larger game piece than normal. I think that can be really cool, and sometimes leads to open-ended emergent creative options where you can technically use them separately, which might end up being useful in some way. I would certainly agree that designing them so that there is some conceivable benefit to using them separately, even though they're designed to be put together, would be good. Okay, so now to go back to the kind of main complaint. The issue is that a lot of them are kind of these type 2 in the middle pairings, where the units are kind of designed intentionally in a narrow way, but not just like you blatantly need them for the piece to be functional. And this is the worst of both worlds. I think I would agree with you. I guess my thesis here is, just to bring it home, that usually the reason that's bad is because they intentionally made the piece really narrow without trying to make it feel like it was required, to pressure the player but not require the player to spend money, basically. And that's why it's bad. Not because having a piece be obviously good with another piece is bad, but because it's done in such a way to pressure the player to spend money that kind of means that it will not be good for anything else. You know, they make them kind of narrow on purpose. And it is not so much that it's just like always uninteresting for something to be obviously good with something else. That is my feeling about the subject. It's an interesting topic. There's a weird dichotomy here as well, where beginning players will often like things to be clearly good here, but then how could I maybe use them in another way? While advanced players will often eye roll a bit at the obvious synergies and want to dig into making something a bit off the beaten path of their own, because it's just fun to figure out and uncover what other strategies are out there. And if the obvious strategies are very obvious and the non-obvious strategies very obscure, I find this can be a little frustrating. It kind of feels like the game is trying to get me not to discover new builds, even though the only point of these systems is for me to find new builds in them. So, well, and to make money. That's it, but it's a topic for another time. We've talked about it a lot on this channel before. Great ARRchive Parley question. Folks, if you want to submit something to Twitch ARRchive Parley, our little Q&A break in the middle of each stream, you could do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. Submit something to that link and I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Asymptomatic, who asks for vague thoughts on default aversion. Default aversion, to emphasize it probably more accurately to what you're thinking. In games with a variety of starting options, so like your first Pokemon, starting Warframe, etc., I, Asymptomatic, pay undue attention to wherever the cursor starts, like the option that's selected right when you load up the game. Warrior? One-handed sword? Gross. I hit right or down to pick literally anything else. Devs cannot tell me how to start my game. Lol. Lol indeed. Interesting. I actually might surprise you by saying that I think this is a not completely unreasonable stance. I'm not going to be... Obviously, you're playing it up for the sake of comedy, and I too have a good laugh at this kind of thing. It reminds me a little bit of the human fighter situation on D&D Beyond, I believe it is. So in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, the character build creator defaults to human fighter, or at least did at one point, is the idea. And so a lot of people acted like, oh, everyone is so boring because human fighter is the most common combination. What we already are, and fighter, which is somehow the most boring one. I don't think fighter is the most boring, but okay. And then you'll get people who will say, I played a human fighter and he was so cool and it was really interesting. And it's like, that's not surprising or noteworthy. Of course you did. Like, that's not hard or strange. But it is still like, why do you want to play explicitly the most normal thing? I bet some people it's to lean into that default more. The greater reason I bring up this anecdote, besides the fact that it's just kind of funny, and this is a phenomenon that is across the internet, is that the default options are, maybe in some games, there because the developers think that people who don't know what to choose would want to choose this. Now, in the D&D Beyond example, we're going to have to get back to it in a sec, because I don't think that is a place where it's a good idea to do that. But let's imagine... So in Cyberpunk 2077, how about that? I actually don't know what the defaults are, but one of the decisions you make is whether your backstory or your inciting incident, really, is that you're a street kid, a corpo, you're part of a corporation, or you're a nomad. Basically, these are people that start outside of Night City before the game begins. And you could imagine that if one or the other or the third was the default, maybe they're saying, if you don't know which experience you want, we think this is the one that is the most, like, probably what you're expecting, which maybe someone who has the analysis paralysis would want. I feel like that's not a great example, though. How about something like in Smash, like Super Smash Brothers? Mario is often the very top leftmost character, and I think this is a good idea. He has kind of the basic tools in the game really solidly down, right? He's very well-rounded, is, I guess, the idea. I'm not necessarily saying that I think it's a good decision for any of these things to be the default or not in these games, just that you can imagine how in some games having a default and the developer thinking, well, I'm going to have this be the default because if the player is trying to figure out how to have a better experience in the game, maybe they'd be happier to pick this. After all, the reason to choose one thing or another in these games is that you can shape the experience to be more like what you would like. And the drawback is generally that you kind of have to in some form. If you don't know what you'd like, the game kind of allows you to finish the last little bit of it to your preferences, but it also requires you to finish the last little bit of it to your preferences. And so having a default option where the player looks at the options and goes, I don't know, and they just pick that, and having that be chosen to lead them to a better experience, this seems good. Now we're back to that D&D Beyond pin. So you can maybe imagine. But in this case, what does Human Fighter make for a good default? It just seems like the most normal thing. You're saying you're trying to not say something about your character, maybe, or some people are doing it for a very different reason, as we talked about. I think to have a better experience in a game like D&D, the default would need to be a kind of random species or race, and then like a simpler class to bookkeep, essentially. Sure, so maybe fighter is not a bad option, but then not human, like definitely randomizing that somewhat to invite the player to roleplay a little more. It's not that you can't, or it's at all bad or inferior to roleplay as a human. It isn't. But I think that for the average person who doesn't know what they're looking for or trying to do, that probably isn't a good idea. So asymptomatically, we've come full circle. I kind of get avoiding that default option. If the developer has taken any agency in choosing that default option, and you have quite literally any opinion whatsoever about what you would like, you indeed shouldn't choose that default option. That is actually probably likely to be something you wouldn't enjoy as much. However, sometimes they didn't do that. In fact, I think a lot of the time they didn't do that. We've talked a lot on this stream about how one of the weaknesses of current game design is, well, build systems is often what we say, but psychology, in my mind, even very basic psychology, just imagining what the player will basically think when they come into the game, is something that seems to be missing from most games ever made, even though it's extremely easy to do. That's very, very easy to do. For some reason, that perspective is kind of not there sometimes. It is in some games. You'll notice it when it's there. But where it's missing, it might be that the default thing is just arbitrary. So I don't know. I mean, there's not an easy solution here. I think in cases where it was done deliberately, you could easily avoid that option. But beyond that, I'm not sure. Is there a way that we can make this more usable advice? Very interesting tendency that you brought up, though. Great, ARRchive Parley. Folks, if you want to submit something to these, you can do that using a link I'm posting in chat right now. If you submit something to that link, I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from Male Human Fighter, who says, I'd like you to react and give your thoughts to this 1-minute skit. And then there's a YouTube link. So I read it, or listened to it, watched it before this stream. And now I'm meant to, here they were capitalized, so let's do that. And now I'm meant to tell you about it. The skit was 3 guys in that YouTube video style where one actor plays a bunch of different characters by just having themselves in different clothes. So this one guy was the Dungeon Master and then 3 player characters. The Dungeon Master pulled out like the player's handbook for D&D 5th edition or something, handed it to them and said, what do you want to be? There's thousands of combinations, blah, blah, blah. And one of them said, I'm going to stop you right there. Male human fighter. And the other guy said, male human fighter. And the other guy said, fighter, human, make it male, or something to that effect. And they're all going to use swords, and one will have a long sword, a short sword, rapier, and you can be anything, and you basically just want to be yourselves. One of the guys said, I like myself. And it's not exactly the same. Another guy chimed in, I don't have a sword in real life. And then he said, okay, you walk into a tavern, and and you see a guy in the corner, and they said, playing D&D, and the DM said, no, oh no. And they walked up and said, hello, Dungeon Master, mayeth we partaketh in the gameth, or whatever it was. And that was the skit. I did that in around a minute. So yeah, that's what's in the skit. And react. Yes, the male human fighter thing. There's kind of 2 prongs I'd like to approach this from. First prong is, I am not sure that I feel like the data that we have where people play male human fighters a lot from D&D Beyond is what it seems to be. It could be that it's like the default is male human fighter, and then people just aren't changing that part of their character build, or when they make a character and they haven't adjusted every single parameter, like that is the parameter that's still there. So I'm a little skeptical that like such a plurality of people choose male human fighter. Let's just imagine that they did, though. I don't want to stymie conversation. I hate it when people do that, when they kind of stop conversation because they reject one of the premises, but they themselves admit, like, I just don't really know if that's true. Let's just assume it's true. Part two. But I don't know, you know. Yeah, I mean, that skit to me, my read of that skit was it can be kind of interesting to have a male human fighter. But there is another side that's like you are missing out on a lot, but also it's not completely unjustifiable to want to just like be, well, yourself. But I mean, I don't know, there's this thing that people always say in response to this trope where I'm a grizzled war veteran who wears his entire life on his face. I've come far and wide looking for one thing, peace. And I can never find it, not anywhere, especially not within myself. Don't cut yourself on that edge. And that could be a human male fighter and be really interesting. Certainly, it is reductive to suggest that what is interesting about your character is your build. Like, not at all. Totally not at all. And that being a male human fighter isn't fantastical. It is. I mean, it totally is. Also, just as an aside to the aside, have you seen the fighter subclasses? Dude, like, it's not like being a normal fighter. Anyway, you know, most of them aren't anyway. So I don't know. I mean, to me, it's kind of a nothing burger. You know, I think the way to deal with the male human fighter thing is to, you know, look at the harm. Do you have a play group of people that will not try anything else and are playing characters they find boring, but they will only pick a male human fighter? Maybe it's time to just encourage them. Like, it's not overcomplicated to play a rogue, you know, or just as an example. And again, subclasses, you can really lean into subclasses. I don't think it's a terrible idea to just get rid of Battlemaster Fighter, make maneuvers be inherent to all martial characters, and you get only half as many maneuvers if you're a half martial, like Rangers and Artificers, Paladins. And then get rid of Champion unless your group is very low level, because it is a little too bare. Like they're, you know, unless they're very new players, it's a little too simple, you could argue. And then there basically aren't really boring fighter subclasses. That's a little reductive, but you get my point. And then, I don't know, like, if you just have one of those, that'll be an interesting character on its own. I think the important thing always is to focus on saying, okay, but why do you want to play that? Because if you're just saying, like, you're excited to do a fantasy adventure as this character, like, there's no problem. I don't know. To me, it's kind of a fire that doesn't need to be put out if people are enjoying playing like a normal character on paper, but then in practice, they're, like, doing something. However, this is a story for another time, maybe later in this stream. I admit, I actually have had the male human fighter player in my playgroup who was like, he was incredibly uninterested in playing. He didn't do anything with his character. He tried to use male human fighter to make no choice about his character, which I would say that is the thing. Not male human fighter, but making no choice about your character that I, as your game master, cannot really allow you to do, because that is the same as not playing the game. And if you've ever been the game master for a game of tabletop role playing, the one enemy of the game master is a player that does not want to play. So while kind of off topic, I will just say, like, that is the real enemy. Don't get distracted. It's always up here, and I always get the wrong side. Good parlay question. If there were too many of these where I had to watch a little thing first, that could be a problem, but let's not worry about it for now. I knew you were trying to experiment. Let's just see how it goes. Looking forward to the next one, folks. You can put something in the link I'm posting in chat, and I'll answer it this time next week if you want to ask a question during these parlay segments. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segments where people submit stuff for me to respond to during the breaks during our streams. This one is from Male Human Fighter 2 in parentheses, who says, same as last time, it's a follow-up to last week. Watch this video and give your thoughts. And there was a link to a video which I watched before this stream. It was, let's say, Male Human Fighter 2. It was like a minute long, so I will briefly describe the video. Last week, we got a video like this from the same prompter, presumably, which was a skit, a D&D related skit video, where 3 players in the Dungeon Masters group choose to play male human fighters, maligned for being boring and stereotypical default class character option. In this skit, the party is cornered by a group of elven archers, basically. It's, I guess, a whole world full of these tropes. And the male human fighters, the joke is that because they're all male human fighters with swords, they picked swords in the last one, they don't have any ranged attacks. And so the male human fighter players start thinking of creative ways that they could maybe interact with their ranged opponents, since they're surrounded. Now, there are various ways in terms of D&D's rules. If this is D&D we're playing, they could take the dodge action. I'm sure that one of them could take the help action for another to throw their weapon, and just it wouldn't do like that much damage, but they can at least interact with the enemies and stuff. But mostly the elf, but really it's the Dungeon Master, was vetoing these things. One of them said, I can catch an arrow mid-flight, and they said, 2 homebrew, like I'll just shoot you in the head or whatever. And one of them suggested something else, and they said no. They suggested, maybe interesting out-of-the-box things. And the game master, the head elf, but that's the game master, right, just said no to all of them. Then one of them pulled out a 3.5 edition D&D source material book that has, rules and supplemental character options inside it. And they flipped through it and found an ability called White Raven Tactics that basically allows you to give another player your turn, kind of. It doesn't matter exactly what it does. This allowed one of them to rush forward really fast by moving a bunch of times in one turn, and then attack a bunch of times in one turn and kill one of the elf archers. And then the DM, actual DM this time, stepped in their bathrobe or whatever and said, wait, you can only use White Raven Tactics once per person per turn or something like that. So that doesn't work. Reset. And they rewound all of time and deleted the players doing that. And the players realized the second time around they could throw their weapons to kill the enemies, which the DM still didn't like, so he spawned in 30 red dragons and killed them all. That was the skip. You didn't say anything specific, male human fighter, to do. You just said to respond. My response is, yeah, that's bad. This is not good DMing. I think the point of the skit was also to say, this is bad DMing. The male human fighter party is actually kind of fun, but this DM sucks. I think that's what they're trying to say. And I agree. I think that the much more interesting subject is what would be a better way to deal with this situation? Because it is actually a very complicated situation, in my opinion, in terms of game design. Why shouldn't the human fighter be able to catch the arrow mid-flight? Or maybe they should be able to. Well, one reason could be that in 5th edition D&D, for example, the monk class can already do that. That is a feature that is in the game already that the player did not choose. But that on its own isn't a reason. Why is it good for it to be that if the player does not choose that option, then they cannot do it? Well, you could argue that it isn't good, and it would be better if the monk was just better at doing that, but the player could attempt to do that. And I'm inclined to agree, but let's keep it simple. We only have 2 more minutes after all. I think that the main thing is that the ability to make a meaningful choice, and you chose a fantasy that focuses on the ability to do certain things, is fulfilling. That can make the game more fun. It can create new modes of play that are interesting. It's more interesting in a fighting game when everyone has well-rounded options, but not everybody can do everything. There are kind of gaps and textures to play. Lacking an ability, provided your dungeon master doesn't disingenuously exploit your lack of that ability, is a source of potential fun. It makes characters feel particular and sequences in your life feel distinct. It's just like how different flavors of tea can be a meaningful thing in life, really. I don't want every good taste ever in every tea. It is fun for them to be separate to an extent. And it's also fun for them not to be separate to an extent. It's kind of satisfying for the staple things to be there. So, I don't know. I mean, it reminded me of an interaction I had with one of my players as a game master, where they tried to disarm an opponent. And I said, I handled it, I think, not as badly as this, but not as well as I could. And I said, well, there is a maneuver. They were a fighter. And in my D&D, every martial character gets maneuvers. So I said to my player, you're a fighter. There is a maneuver that lets you disarm, but you chose not to take it. So I want to say that you can't do it here. And they said, but can I like get in the way of the attacker or do something? And at that moment, I think the best thing would have been for me to notice if they really want to do it, the ideal thing is to just let them attempt something. You know, the player wants to do a thing in your game. This is your goal as a game master. The player wants to do the thing. There has to be something really bad for it to be bad to let them do the thing. You know, it has to be disastrous. I think it's often better to just let them do it and then talk to them after and say, you can choose to learn this skill now. But if you don't choose to learn it, like it was a rush of adrenaline, and know that this is a separate thing, and just explain that to them afterward and say, it can be nice for people to have variety and that can add texture to the game, and say all that stuff I said, but say it after, I think. I think fairly obviously. And I didn't know how, I wasn't ready with that response, which is why I gave the worst response. But I credit where credit's due to me. I didn't spawn 30 red dragons on top of them. And I think more to the point, the White Raven tactics thing is like the players dug deep and figured something out. I don't think it's good that the unimaginative rules lawyery thing worked, but the imaginative thing didn't work. But if the players figured something out, I would just hand wave doing it multiple times in a turn and say, in the future, like, you realize you could give contradicting orders if you all yell at the same time. Like, so White Raven tactics only works once per turn, but just let them have it for that moment. What fun is gained by not letting them do that? I don't know. I don't think that is important unless the players are being very obviously disingenuous. They're trying to do something broken and abuse the system to delete the game master's encounters, which was not what was happening in this skit, in my opinion. That was my response. I hope that was interesting along lines of what you were looking for. Folks, if you'd like to submit your own prompt that I'll answer during these segments, you can do that using a link I'm putting in the chat. If you click that link and submit something, I'll answer it during the next segment of Twitch ARRchive Parley in the middle of next week's stream, this time next week. Looking forward to it. We'd love to have you. It's free. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to this midstream Q&A break segment. This question is from a concerned negotiator who asks, okay, it's long. As the leading negotiator working for the US on a high-profile diplomatic incident that shan't be discussed here, and while our current running strategy has been working well for us in the past, we're unsure as to our success given the particulars of the other party, Australia. We're big fans of opening negotiations by bringing in our diplomatic tiger. We've heard from several sources that the diplomats over in Australia have acquired the services of a kickboxing kangaroo. And it came up in the chat of your prior tea time stream toward the end. We were wondering if you could shed light on what diplomatic animal would win, and any advice as to the changes we could make to ensure such uncertainty never arises again. For example, the Australians might call upon the services of their conquerors, the emus, and in such a case, we're worried that the US isn't quite prepared to face such a foe. Any advice or reassurances would be welcome. Sincerely, a concerned negotiator, whom will not leave their name for obvious security reasons. I'm sure you understand. I just really don't. So it's supposed to have a topic title. We'll say animal pseudo-politics. Metaphors? Political metaphors? I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how to answer this in a meaningful way. This is, and this feels like a silly thing to say after all of the Q&A responsey things we've done, after all of the parlay on the Pantaloon Saloon channel, after all the ARRchive Parley, the shorter parlay here in these break segments. It feels silly to say this, but to be completely honest with you, I would say at this moment, this is the prompt I've been given in my life that I have had the most difficulty deciding how to answer meaningfully. I don't really know what to say that would be relevant because I have simply no idea what you're talking about. So I'm just going to say a few things. First of all, the first thing that came to mind is that this reminds me of when people use like political metaphors, basically. So I do think it's true that in politics, people have a tendency to gravitate toward the team and therefore the team word that they feel they support or are attached to. And of course, we know that for most people, this doesn't really have to do with the practical consequences of supporting that candidate. It's a vibes thing, not a very good way to decide who is in charge of giant chunks of the world, but that's what most people do. It's an interesting question of democracy. But the point is, sometimes it can be interesting to abstract the candidates' names. You would find, if you did this, that if you described their positions, even if, by magic, you described them as honestly and impartially as possible, but you simply removed the name of the candidates who had that position and replaced them with, for example, a tiger, a kickboxing kangaroo, or the emus, in this case, I guess, people would not agree with their opinion, basically. Like, they would support policies that are not the same as the candidate that they would support. That's probably not a very hot take from most people listening to this, but all over the world, I'm sure people would say, no, that's not true. It obviously is, but okay. I think many people don't even know the policies of the candidate they're quote-unquote supporting. So that it kind of made me think of that. Australia. So it's the US, the emus. The Australians might call upon the services of their conquerors. I feel like Australia wasn't so much conquered by England as sort of the reverse. I don't know my Australian history very well also, so I'm not sure what that is. It made me think England, but maybe that's wrong. I don't know what to say about that. So we'll just put that there. Tiger, kickboxing kangaroo, certainly an Australian animal by reputation, and then emus. I'm arrested by this ARRchive Parley. I simply don't know what to do about it. And in particular, the part where you say, as it came up in the chat of your prior tea time stream toward the end. Did it? I feel like I would have remembered that. I believe you that in some form we talk about a wide variety of things, and therefore maybe it could be okay. A concerned negotiator. Maybe it had to do with the fact that I was encouraging people to feel free to have political discussions on these streams, and so you're making a political metaphor for the currently tumultuous political situation in the United States, but you said in Australia, and it's the US being concerned about... And are the US and Australia currently debating something? Is there a trade war thing happening currently between the US and Australia? Wouldn't be the first one this week that was happening with some or other arbitrary political neighbor. Not Australia is not really a political neighbor, but, you know, to the US. I don't know. That you'll have to take my confusion as your entertainment. I simply don't know how to respond meaningfully to this. I think the biggest thing about this, I guess the least I can do is say what is confusing me. The biggest thing is that I feel like there's like a joke I'm not getting or like a reference I'm not finding. And I, as you say, live under a rock on purpose, unlike most people, because I think that a lot of the news and current, for example, political climate and social media is really bad for you while giving you almost no benefit for spending all of your time focused on it. And so sometimes I worry that this is actually really obvious to most people, but it just isn't obvious to me. I think a difference between me and most people for whom that would be true is that I intend not to know the reference. But I could be wrong. I also have a sense as I'm saying this that, perhaps not. There isn't a reference I'm missing. It's just... I'm just not deconstructing it well enough. I would love to give you a better answer. That's what I've got. I let it never be said that I will not try. If you want to submit a prompt like this is fine, as long as you're prepared for me to not exactly know what to say. ARRchive Parley, like full-length Parley, it's an improvisational response series, so as long as you're prepared that it's possible I will be flummoxed by what you say. Yeah, I think I have a pretty good track record. There have been some pretty weird things submitted to these, and I've still given a meaningful response. But anyway, you can put that in a link in the chat. If you want to submit something, I'll answer it this time next week. For now, on with the show. Hello and welcome back to our little midstream Q&A break segments. This question is from Asymptomatic, who asks for thoughts on challenging your biases. Great with the topics, getting that in early. Games with healthy buildcraft are still subject to feeling solved, sure. Player option A plugs so well into player option B. There must not be a better, more sensical combination, right? Wrong. One early bias I had in ChronoArc was that Silverstein hates created skills, because Silverstein's passive rewards you for following up attacks on the same target, but it doesn't trigger when you follow up an attack on the same target with a skill that was created in your hand. So for example, let's say you cast a spell that says do damage to this target and create an extra spell in your hand that can also be cast to deal damage to this target. Silverstein's passive won't trigger on the created skill from that attack. There's a character, Azar, who's all about created skills. He has an ability like the one I just described. He constantly does that. They must not go well together, right? However, Silverstein also has an ability called Quickfire that simply does more damage for every card played, created or not. Those don't trigger his passive, but he still has abilities that are good when you use created skills. Going full unlimited blade works will see Silverstein shoot for each illusion sword from Azar, even though they're created skills that don't work with his passive. You could argue in this case that Silverstein is thematically about lots of rapid attacks, even if some parts of his kit don't reward them. Sure, I have some thoughts about this. One of the first things that comes to mind that you might be able to relate to, Asymptomatic, is that sometimes I can be attached to what feels like a kind of non-bow, and it can feel like a bad thing. The example I always give is that if you go to a restaurant and you order a steak, and it's a good steak, and you go to another restaurant and you get like the same good steak, but they also give you a bad steak on the side for no extra cost. Unambiguously, the good steak and the free bad steak is better value. It might not be significantly better value because the bad steak is worthless, right? But it doesn't have anti-worth as long as they don't charge you for it, right? Yet I think a lot of people would review the good steak with the side of bad steak at worse, even though clearly, I mean, it's just everything that's good about just the good steak, plus a nearly worthless but consequenceless bad steak. You might not want to be wasteful, of course, but I'm just saying value for money for the consumer. Like, it's not bad that they also give you a service you dislike, or two identical restaurants, one of them you also get access to a soda fountain, but the soda fountain is bad and gross. They can be a bit gross. It's fine, just don't use it. But in a way, we associate that as, ooh, that's less pleasant. I think that it can happen with games and build systems with synergy a lot, where even though this ability is cheap to cast and will trigger Silverstein's passive, because it creates a byproduct that doesn't trigger his passive, it feels like that is thematically less than other effects. And in the case of build systems, you can argue that in a way it is less good, because part of the fun is not simply to win, but to get to create a machine that fits together. And this ability, though it is still good with his passive, maybe doesn't feel like part of a machine that fits together. However, adding in something like his quickfire ability that triggers for everything you've cast that turn, regardless of where it came from, means, oh, well, his passive just doesn't trigger off of those free abilities because that is really overpowered. It would make it too easy to break. And if you could see it that way, with the aid of the game giving you some reward for thematically playing a lot of attacks, then sometimes it can feel fine. in a way. So I like how you presented the concept asymptomatic. You presented it, at least as far as I understand, more like reevaluating an option and, oh, it actually is pretty good. But I want to suggest that in a way, well, it really is bad in one way of thinking about enjoyment. But then the quickfire ability rewarding you for playing a lot of skills, regardless of their source, kind of helps reward back again that mindset you'd initially had. So I don't know, you could see it a few different ways. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic that's only scratching the surface, but pretty cool. Folks, if you'd like to submit your own questions to these little Q&A breaks we do in the middle of every stream, which I call Twitch ARRchive Parley, like our full-length parlay, you can submit whatever you want. I just answer them very briefly in this case. You can submit something using a link in the description. We won't be streaming this time next week, but usually we stream every week on Thursdays. I'll answer whatever you submit the next stream on a Thursday. For now, on with the show.